So, welcome everybody. Thank you for being here in the last event of this session of the Crik Festival, which is the June session of the Crik Festival. Stanimir will have the honor to close this festival, this session with a lecture on the Rezervna army. Stanimir Panaјotov is a well-known friend of ours, very often he has been in Skopje, he's lived in Skopje. He is currently finishing his PhD at the Central European University, and he's been working quite a lot with queer theory and philosophy right now. Stanimir also edits several publications, among them the journal Identities, and has been featured in an article in different queer publications. So Stanimir, thank you for coming again to Skopje. It's a pleasure to host you always, and I'm looking forward to your presentation today with a very expectable, it was for me very, I expected this sort of attention from me. It's quite dark and
there's nothing as queer as that, I guess. As announced, I hope this will be in English. So I hope that everybody's comfortable with that. Thanks to Grижiniќ and Stanimir for the invitation. Flattered to round up the whole thing. So what I'm going to try to do in this presentation is divided in three parts. I initially thought that I'm going to focus on the second part and I'm just going to rush to the first one. I realized it wouldn't be that easy because the whole context of this manuscript, which has been written about 4 years ago, and it's still forthcoming in a publication by Manchester University Press, which has been on hold for a while. It will eventually come up. It's a publication that's edited by Rafał Majka and a couple of other co-editors from Poland. So it's, in a way, for me, it's the first time I present this manuscript. I haven't communicated it to the world. And one of the reasons why I thought this would be a very fitting subject would be that when I was going through the concept of the festival, when Iskra and Arthur initially invited me, I was like, okay, I don't know very well this novel by Robert Musil, and I kind of started ruminating around the concept, and then I thought about this manuscript. And the reason why I thought it's a good idea to present it is that, first of all, it's based on the so-called literature on necropolitics, which is very briefly a theoretical field in the last approximately 15 years, which deals with the management of human populations and their ability to die rather than their capacity to live, let's put it that way. A very broad definition, which is not very scholarly. Because necropolitics focuses so much on how human populations worldwide are managed according to the different modi operandi of dying, I thought this is one way of looking at the concept of this festival, the man without qualities, or the human without qualities. Because the crucial thing, as I see it in the literature of necropolitics, of which I'm going to talk briefly, is that death becomes a quality of politics. That becomes the axis of governing an entire population that has a sovereign behind it. And so this is why I hope this might be a fitting subject. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to present three parts. The first part of this text is based on Marina Grижinić and Šefik Tatlić, along with the work with Mbembe. That's the book that initially triggered my interest in this topic. Other than Mbembe, who is one of the pillars of the literature of necropolitics, in his seminal text, Necropolitics from 2001. So let's first make 3 points about this. The first one was about necropolitics. I already made it. I gave a very broad, non-scholarly definition of necropolitics as it is conceptualized. The way I'm going to proceed is I'm going to briefly talk the work of Marina Grижinić and Šefik Tatlić, what I saw in their work and how it relates to the second and third part of my presentation. The second part is on the notion of reserve labor army, and the third part is the notion of the reserve debt army that I try to develop. So, in that book, Topic and Grижиниќ discuss in great detail the connection between neoliberal rationality and biopolitics. But what they do is they specifically underline that this is a framework made to fit the so-called first world of globalization, that is to say the Western European, North Atlantic world, a first globalized world. They theorize that the so-called first world and biopolitics condition each other so that the population control can be properly organized. Now, what they claim, the claim that they espouse is the following. Biopolitics has been reserved for the first world's governmentality. Biopolitics is reserved only for the fictitious battle of forms of life, although death is all around it. The biopolitical in the first capitalist world includes life as a political concern, but only to its exclusion from the political sphere. Now, I first go into this quotation about biopolitics in order to make a juxtaposition between biopolitics and necropolitics for the simple reason that other than transitioning to the problematic of necropolitics, what Grижiniќ and Topic do in a very nice and challenging way is that they illuminate, they make a point that has rarely been made. Maybe I don't know the literature so well. But their essential point is that biopolitics as a notion, whether it's Foucauldian or not, has been a notion that we have automatically applied to different geographical realities, including Central and Eastern Europe, where we happen to be right now. And there's something false behind the application of the notion of biopolitics in a cross-geographical sense. And I think their point is very fair, that there is a separate literature that exists for the last, I would say, 15 years. For example, Dusan Bjelic has been working on that tries to uncover what biopolitics meant for the Soviet bloc, for the ex-Yugoslav area, etc., etc. Sergei Prozorov is the person who's working on biopolitics in the Soviet Union, for example. So my first point was to go to this false idea that biopolitics can cross different geographies in a non-problematic way to Grижiniќ and Topic. So what they propose, the authors then propose two formula corresponding to biopolitics and necropolitics. Foucault's biopolitics can be formalized in the following way: make live and let die. Grижiniќ and her notion of necropolitics can be summarized in the following way: let live and make die. These are the two basic definitions and juxtapositions between biopolitics and necropolitics. Now, the liberal capitalist democracies may fake the regulation of their own conscience, of their own conscience, but it will be a methodological blunder to disrespect the entire theater of governmental hope they continuously enact, even when their political apotheosis results in the proliferation of necropolitics. Such view is outlined by the thesis that, I quote, when biopolitics was first elaborated in the 1970s, it was made for the capitalist first world and its apparatuses, where the other didn't really exist. But there was a parallel colonial regime in Eastern Europe. And this parallel colonial regime is something that I think can be easily conceptualized by looking at works such as the book by Šefik Tadić and Marina Gržinić, along with African theories such as Ahele Mbembe, because they can both capture the intricacies of biopolitics before and after the fall of the Berlin Wall, and in times of what necropolitics is right now. I have two main points of concern. The first one is that the parallel state socialist biopolitics should be read as state capitalist biopolitics, that is, its othering. This, of course, relies on what sort of theory you have about state socialism, whether it's state capitalism or not. My position has always been that it's state capitalism. And the second concern is that the reserve labor army in socialist state capitalism did not nominally exist. After 1989, it should be read as what I call the reserve debt army. And that's the subject of my third part of the presentation. Socialist state capitalism had successfully covered its own people as the other. Grижиниќ and her effort is to demonstrate the workings of necropolitics in Central and Eastern Europe after the Cold War. That it can be sustained by the supplementary effort to think of necropolitical population control as transitional waste management, correlative to the Central and Eastern European unrestrained shock doctrine model of governance. Such effort entails the resuscitation of Marx and his notion of reserve labor army and meeting that notion with Grижиниќ and her theory of necropolitics as applied to the region of Central and Eastern Europe. I'll go to my second part, which is I go into an elaboration into Marx and Engels. Both Marx and Engels are important here. It's not just Marx and Engels, it's Marx and Engels. Because truly Engels is one of the people to whom we owe the remembrance and the development of this notion of the reserve labor army. He wasn't just a conscientious editor of Marx. He was a thinker in his own right. So let's go through the notion of the reserve labor army. To adjust on my part what is already an adjustment of Mbembe's necropolitics offered by Grижиниќ and Totlich, I suggest to call the byproduct of necropolitics in Central and Eastern Europe the reserve debt army. What the term captures is what Grижiniќ and Totlich's recognition of liberal capitalism's unapologetic character explains away, namely its exploitative modus operandi of the political instrumental value of debt. The valuation of debt is the same as its exploitation. The obsolescence of labor entails the perishability of populations. My elaboration is, in its own right, an offshoot of Mbembe's notion of indirect private government. I don't have the time to discuss it now. He speaks of indirect private government, which describes both the privatization of state sovereignty and the assimilation of the means of coercion of the state, carried through neoliberal policies. Yet, here I return to Marx to develop the term reserve labor army, which he himself borrowed from Engels. Marx's scholarship uses both reserve labor army and reserve army of labor. A distinction is drawn between industrial reserve army and relative surplus population to accommodate those unable to work in the latter group, while the able unemployed can be described by both terms. Now, I choose to use the term army as it carries the sense of militarization and henceforth dispensing with the figure of the worker. The dispensation with the human is merely implied here, although under necro-rationality there is no need of discarding an invariant of humanism to render populations obsolete. At this point, I still think of the worker rather than the human. The worker is a figure that indexes the correlation between exploitation and labor force. Now, let's briefly go to Engels in his discussion of the reserve army of labor, which draws a quite grim picture of survival. This is a quotation from The Condition of the Working Class in England. And it goes as follows. Can you read well this? Okay. It is clear that English manufacturer must have at all times, save the brief periods of highest prosperity, an unemployed reserve army of workers in order to be able to produce the masses of goods required by the market in the liveliest moments. This reserve army is larger or smaller according as the state of the market occasions the employment of a larger or smaller proportion of its members. And if at the moment of highest activity of the market, the agricultural districts and the branches least affected by the general prosperity temporarily supply to manufacture a number of workers, these are a mere minority, and these too belong to the reserve army, with the single difference that the prosperity of the moment was required to reveal their connection with it. When they enter upon the more active branches of work, their former employers draw in somewhat in order to feel the loss less, work longer hours, employ women and younger workers, and when the wanderers discharged at the beginning of the crisis return, they find their places filled and themselves surplus, at least in the majority of cases. This reserve army is the surplus population of England. Now, Engels narratively anticipates here the laws of labor and demand. Marx will later sketch, actually 2 years later, this text of Engels is from 1845, and Marx's text, which I'm switching now, is from 1847. So Marx will sketch this 2 years later on the basis of his analysis, although his intention seems to be more representational, to describe the proletariat as consistently shaken by the vagaries of surplus value extraction as it is tied to starvation. The emphasis goes to the obsolescence or superfluity of the masses. The rate of profit can progress only if the workman can be continuously jettisoned outside the relations of exchange in the market. For his part, Marx briefly takes the term in the 1847 year in a manuscript that he later abandoned. The manuscript is from, it's called Wages, December 1847. And this is how he first talks about the term. Big industry constantly requires a reserve army of unemployed workers for times of overproduction. The main purpose of the bourgeois in relation to the worker is, of course, to have the commodity labor as cheaply as possible, which is only possible when the supply of this commodity is as large as possible in relation to the demand for it, i.e., when the overpopulation is the greatest. Overpopulation is therefore in the interest of the bourgeoisie, and it gives the workers good advice, which it knows to be impossible to carry out. Since capital only increases when it employs workers, the increase of capital involves an increase of the proletariat. And as we have seen, according to the nature of the relation of capital and labor, the increase of the proletariat must proceed relatively even faster. Now, these passages resurfaced in the published form only in 1924-5. They were undiscovered until then, but they had already set the tone of the much discussed chapter 25 of Capital, Volume 1, where in the section titled Section 3, Progressive Production of a Relative Surplus Population or Industrial Reserve Army, Marx introduces the concept of the Industrial Reserve Army, whose necropolitical continuity actually caught my attention, and then I started developing this whole idea of the Reserve Army. So the quotation is from Capital Volume 1, in 1867, and it goes like this. Capitalistic accumulation itself constantly produces, and produces in direct ratio of its own energy and extent, a relatively redundant population of workers, i.e. a population of greater extent than services for the average needs of the valorization of capital, and therefore a surplus population. It is the absolute interest of every capitalist to press a given quantity of labor out of a smaller rather than a greater number of laborers, if the cost is about the same. The more extended the scale of production, the stronger this motif. Its force increases with the accumulation of capital. End quote. Constant capital outwits variable capital. This is what happens here. Constant capital outwits variable capital. The existence of the reserve labor army is the condition for the alienation of constant capital from the labor force. If the effect on the reserve labor army on the societies of capitalist production is that the rate of unemployment will increase, and the competition among workers will rise, and that part of the population will become obsolete to the process of capitalist composition, This effect, at least dialectically, recognizes the necessary existence of unemployed masses for capital to be progressively autonomized. In short, there is no way to produce the reserve labor army without implicitly recognizing the necessity for the lives of these people, of these workers that are going to be starving, however unemployable. The whole concept of industrial or reserve labor army implicitly recognizes the value of the life of these workers, although they are starved. And this makes the notion of the reserve labor army a biopolitical notion. It is not a necropolitical notion, even though it might sound as one. The historical conditions under which this notion can be understood are framed and should be framed as biopolitical, because at the time there was a notion of sovereignty of the people that, even in collusion with capitalist mode of production, recognizes the necessity of the life of the worker. For the disjunction set forth between constant and variable capital projects the ideal of capitalist autonomy and liberation from the labor force, although here starvation is not the same as depopulation. I'm going now to my last and third part, which is called Marx with Mbembe, from reserve labor army to reserve-led army. When we speak of reserve-led army, the resulting implication is that the surplus population is no longer a necessary piece in the puzzle of capitalist accumulation. That is to say, the sovereign doesn't need it in reserve alive. Although the reservation slots of debt could be an involuntary, unintended consequence of capitalist autonomy, and that the level of machine homeostasis in capital composition and accumulation has taken place, the effect being that fewer and fewer workers can and should reproduce. The more capital composition gets autonomized, the deader the reserve labor army. The question of the worker's dormant productive force, the question of keeping the worker alive, is abandoned with the absolute tendency to substitute labor force for debt ability with a line in between. The concentration of capital and its uneven distribution in fewer hands brings about the historical necessity to subtract the worker herself from the equation where capital now could produce with fewer to no hands, the question of capital autonomization. Now, the question here is, at what point does the reserve labor army transitions to what I call the reserve-led army? This event, I think, takes place when and where there is no need for exchange, as relations of exchange and capital's autonomy contradict each other. Marx concludes that there is a correlation between the wealth of a society and the rate of unemployment, or the size of the reserve labor army. In theory, a wealthier society should be able to support larger and unemployed populations, which is a corporatist utopia, of course, which Marx, in Volume 3 of Capital, himself called the communism of capital. This is something that Antonio Negri has worked upon very laborously. He has a great article on that subject that I quote in the manuscript of this text, but I'm not going to go through it. The reason why the reserve labor army transitions to something like the reserve-led army is the following. If money becomes the symbol of equivalence, if they are reduced to an accounting unit of commodities, if they cease to index a relation of exploitation and are swiped away by welfareist solutions of the state, conceded by the communism of capital, then capital will be no different than a language game. But this doesn't fully explain how to renegotiate a new Malthusian solution on the question of overpopulation. After all, the whole necropolitical literature and tendencies in global governance is in a way a continuation of Malthusian population control. Mbembe offers the answer of so-called indirect private government. Capitalist accumulation and concentration can dispense with parts of the population if it can privatize sovereignty and, more importantly, the means of coercion. And here's a quote from a book by Mbembe, from Necropolitics by Mbembe. They, in this case the policies, have created the conditions for privatization of this sovereignty. But the struggle to privatize state sovereignty largely overlaps the struggle to concentrate and then privatize the means of coercion. Because control of the means of coercion makes it possible to secure an advantage in the other conflicts underway for the appropriation of resources and other utilities formerly concentrated in the state. One characteristic of the historical sequence unfolding in Africa is the direct link that now exists between, on the one hand, the regulation and the primacy of the market, and on the other hand, the rise of violence and the creation of private military, paramilitary, or jurisdictional organizations. End quote. Privatized sovereignty and coercion solve the welfarist model and riddle of social capital, which is neither communism nor capitalism. In other words, this idea by Keynes that there's this zero value balance under welfarism, where there's neither too much inflation nor too much deflation. As the surplus population was the centerpiece of Marx and his law of demand and supply of labor, under Mbebe's notion of necropolitics, the worker's labor is substituted for the death of the human, or again, the death ability of the human. The very reproducibility and availability of a living population in direct codependence with its own death toll. With the reserve death army, a population's perishability and livability is dictated by its principle and organic impossibility to become labor force, itself governed by the radical alienation and autonomization of capital composition from the labor capacities of the population. In other words, this is a necropolitical notion, reserve death army, because the employability of the worker is no longer desired. It's no longer on the table. What's on the table is the perishability of parts of the human population, and their ability to die is the centerpiece of their life. This is my definition of the reserve death army. The reserve death army is a figure of the complete realization of the capitalist utopia, the ultimate freedom of capital from labor force. Yet, this freedom need not culminate in a concrete utopian humanism of leisure and welfarism. On the contrary, the flight of capital from the dialectical confines of the reserve labor army becomes the harbinger of death, as productivity is no longer tied to a political notion of life and subjectivity, themselves reducible to sovereign. For the reserve death army, subjectivity is irreducible to sovereign. The sovereign is death unmediated by the state and unrestrained by a notion of capital accumulation. Now, this privatization realizes the absolute ahistorical utopia of a dream world capital, freed of the limitations that the factum of human embodiment implies. Here, the reserve death army is a vulgarized way of saying the post-human. Strictly speaking, when capital composition is increasingly able to do away with the exploitation of human life, and I say human life, which shouldn't be, again, mixed with labor force, because the labor force no longer plays a game here. When starvation and pauperdom is not even on the agenda of governance, it ceases to exist as capital composition, as life is translated into its own discomposition. The reserve death army articulates the step from exploitation to extinction simply because variable capital could be rendered superfluous. It is not a reserve. There can be no composition of capital that excludes the variable capital. In the exact same moment when capitalism no longer needs the living behind the abstraction of unemployed labor force, its flight from humanity is no longer science fiction, but the concrete utopia of extinction-level event. But its exploitation of humanity can no longer function as extraction of labor, which redefines the limits of what can be thought of as capital. It is at this moment that the extraction of labor is substituted to the extraction or the demand of debt. This constitutes the necropolitical shift within capital pseudo-composition. The concrete utopia of capital comes to fruition with the proliferation of the reserve debt army, an army that can be coerced into debt without having to ever be in the relations of exploitation or exchange. A worker can now spend her entire life waiting to be employed, and at the same time expecting to die without having to ever work or hope for and expect any social security whatsoever. So this is not biopolitics. There is nothing biopolitical here. The higher the reserve debt army and its own debt toll, the lower the expenses for its own decimation. The stronger the autonomy of capital and the larger the wasteful population, the higher the level of killability and the lower the level of livability. To conclude, now that the reserve debt army is produced, it no longer represents the pauperdom of which Marx laboriously spoke, but the privatized sovereign that Mbembe so effortlessly captured. Because the representatives of pauperdom have lost their functionality as surplus population, they no longer have access to the romantic rebellious refuge of criminality. And I say criminality here because the reserve labor army has been largely associated with the notion of the lumpen proletariat. After the privatization of the means of coercion, the lumpen proletariat has lost its correctional charm for both the working class and the capitalists. The reserve debt armies of the world are not expendable, downplayed criminals. They're the impossible and the debilitated delinquents of life. Thank you.
Okay, but if someone has a comment or a question to something, it's allowed to
do you consider this situation of unemployment to be a historic necessity? As an opponent of the 19th century, the capitalism was expanding, and when there was a death penalty for unemployment, so everybody has to work, otherwise you're not a decent citizen, and even this was also for the adolescents, so everybody has to be, so now it seems like there is a death penalty for the ones that are employed.
Is this a comment, right? It's not a question.
Just a philosophical provocation, if you like you to comment.
No, right, I understand, but it's, I don't know if it's even philosophical, it's just a fact from the past. That's the point of what I try to present. That, people like Foucault describe, the creation of the working houses and how this became, the various lots of, human productivity that, you can't be just a vagrant on the street, you have to do something, So, England created the working houses, I think was the term. He describes that in great detail, and what I'm describing here has nothing to do with death penalty. The death penalty here is the fact of being alive. That's death penalty in the notion of the reserve debt army that I propose. Of course, this notion can cover the entire world. It has certain heuristical value, but one of the reasons why I say that life itself becomes your own death penalty is that you don't even have to. There are places, including Central and Eastern Europe after the transition, where you can spend your lifetime by virtually everybody expecting you to die and never work. Or even worse, nobody expecting anything from you.
had all my reserves, many reservations. But I just tried to make it as abstract as general question that was a provocation to you. I mean, and since here, at least for the Sheffield and Marina part, neither of them are here. They're close friends, and we have been having that at Crate. Not just, I guess, not once, but quite often. So I would say it's, it seems like the shift, the only stable thing in your presentation, so from the shift from biopolitics that you claimed would be, or they claimed, Achille and Eнгелс claimed that it would be still valid or applicable to the so-called NATO area, let's say the Enlightened West. The shift to necropolitics, which then could be applied to other regions of the globe, but the only stable reference is actually capitalism. So my first provocation is actually it would follow, I would say, from your line of argument, that even it's not just that the labor force as a category is non-applicable or bad, but actually also that capitalism is bad. So this would be one provocation. And the thinking why that would be so, let's say that necropolitics is it seems like is a more general or more even more effective term than biopolitics. In a sense, it seems, and this is, let's say, this would be my intuition. And it's interesting enough that in Grижиниќ and Kartech paper, they involve forensics. There was something of forensics. It would be that, and this is something you really nicely have shown what it means, what reserve labor force means. And you haven't sketched out that the exact figure of the reserve labor force would be a zombie, would be a living dead, would be also vampire. I mean, many different figurations you could think of. But what is interesting, the reserve labor force, the notion of it, is still that the bond of society, if it is life, is that life is always present. Life is always present. It's always in the present. It's always contemporaneous. Everything within a society of biopolitics is always contemporaneous. It's always here, now. With necropolitics, which I think makes it more effective, is that actually necropolitics is expanding the bond of society from the present, from the imperative to the present, of the living something that we now encounter, to both past and future. And this, I mean, I'm now just end with this provocation, just by evoking this wonderful sentence, often misunderstood by Walter Benjamin, where he says, now we are on the brink. This is one of his theses on history. Now we are on the brink of something new, which he then called fascism in the 1930s, which will be able to reverse not just the present and maybe dominate the future, but it will be much more able to reverse, really to reverse. I mean, he was really sincere about it, to reverse also the past, to rewrite the past. And I guess that this ability of necropolitics, which is not sticking to the notion of the present, or the present life, but of lives, both death in a sense of the past and the death or future death, is incredibly effective. It's incredibly effective, and there maybe, again, I would say, I would concur, so this I am my provocation, I would concur with everything you said. I mean, it's really wonderful outline. Just that if you take up necropolitics to be the metaphor of the present, I would say no. It's not the present. So necropolitics is actually not dealing with the present. Then it would be still biopolitics. In what way we think of it, like living dead, zombies, vampires, aliens, whatever. But so again, I would then urge you to expand your notion of paper. You still have time, maybe if it's not already published, with the notion of the temporality of the necropolitics. And I think, taking into account Benjamin's intuition that fascism, as he said, is so powerful because it promises to rewrite the past and also to change the future already now. This would be my
Great. Thank you for the provocation. Since it's not a question, I'll just briefly say a couple of things. first of all, this entire paper is one in a series of 3 texts that I ended up with. The first one was a large book review cum essay of Tattoo by Grижиниќ, and so after that I was asked to write something about this volume. So this is the second text and there's the third one. What lies at the heart of this series of 3 papers is precisely the claim that necropolitics is a specific, has to be taken as a specific heuristical notion for political transition. I hate the term transition, but I still use it, in Central and Eastern Europe, regardless of whether that's ex-Yugoslav or ex-satellite Soviet countries, and should be applied to those societies. So that's the crux of the argument that I'm making. But I didn't focus so much on the first part, because I wanted to go through the historical part and my own understanding of the Rezervната argument. So I agree that what happened, what should be done, and what I'm trying to do actually with necropolitics as a framework, as proposed by Grижиниќ, is to apply to the transition to so-called liberal democracy and capitalism in Central Eastern Europe. So in this sense, you can say this is a Benjaminian approach. In this sense, because you read the past retroactively as something that has already happened in order to change it conceptually. But there is no Jewish mysticism in my reading of this. It's very pragmatic rereading of the past. So for me, this is the major challenge to convince other people. We haven't really had politics in Central Eastern Europe. I don't. Ever since I discovered this argument and the way Grижиниќ work with Mбембе, I became convinced that we actually haven't had politics. And after the transition to capitalism, we've been immersed in necropolitics all along.
But I'm confused with this last claim. We never had biopolitics. You mean we never had biopolitics since '89 till now, or we never had?
No, since '89. Since the fall of the
fall.
Yeah, that's my interpretation. Not mine.
Yeah. Okay, but here I have to intervene, and I think it's a grave mistaken reading that Grижиниќ and Tatlić do of Foucault, and Grижiniќ has done this wrong reading of Foucault for many years. Now I will not go into that. The first thing is that Foucault has never denied the existence of necropolitics or thanatopolitics. Actually, he has brought the two notions in correlation together, like they always go one with each other. My problem is that when we set necropolitics a central notion in our context, at the same time, we neglect a lot of biopolitical mechanisms which are being employed. On the one hand, because there is the production of the neoliberal subject in this context, at least at those who succeed and whose life are being made and produced with biopolitical mechanisms. On the other hand, we had different forms of vistas through which capitalism, neoliberal capitalism, operates at least for some populations, for their benefit, the production and reproduction of their life forms, while it produces this reserve debt army. So I'm not convinced in their argument, and there is Marina's usual tendency to dismiss certain notions in order to operate with some inventive and new category that brings, like, I don't know, apocalyptically new thinking. But in those terms, I'm very suspicious in dismissing, especially since she also operates a lot with the Agamben's framework of biopolitics, which is much more tied to sovereignty than Foucault's work is tied. So yeah, that is just my remark, my problem with their initial thesis, and I think that we cannot that easily dismiss the notion of biopolitics and its operationality in our context.
Actually, my problem with Grижиниќ and Tatlić was that I had a communication with them when I was writing the book review. It was more of an essay, actually. It was published in 2014, I think, yeah. Back then I asked them, so they mentioned Marx in passing. My worry wasn't how they misuse Foucault. My worry was that they don't use Marx. And you know, then it becomes more complicated because you know Foucault doesn't like Marx, obviously not that much. You know, so you know it's a kind of theoretical hodgepodge, which I like. I mean, I think people should be free to speculate about historical genealogies. I don't think that Foucault has been oblivious about necropolitics. I think, however, that Grижиниќ and Tatlić are right to claim that people like Foucault don't necessarily have to have a notion of biopolitics extending outside the Iron Curtain. I think you know that's a legitimate assumption. So in that regard, that's okay. But there's several pages I missed from the paper, and there's this one where I actually say that Grижiniќ and Tatlić never manifestly state that they will write a genealogy. They never state that they will write a genealogical history of new necropolitics and liberalism. That is what happens after 1999. They don't want to do that. They just want to apply the notion of necropolitics to what happened after the transition to capitalism, which I think they do convincingly. But yeah, I agree that Foucault is a little bit like the Gospel of John. You know, everybody reads it. You know, everybody reads him differently. You know, so especially with regards to how you position him politically. You know, what political coordinates. You know, he can be from neoliberal to extreme left. You know, so and that has happened obviously. So you know.
Other questions? Okay, thank you very much for being here. Thank you very much, Stanimir.
Thank you.
Participating in visiting this year's Crik Festival. We promise we will, as soon as possible, announce also, of course, by the end of this summer, announce the program and the agenda and participants for the second part of Crik, which will be taking the 5th and 3rd and 4th. So we will have events in September, but October as well. Thank you again.